Cassandra 9 lay beneath a sky that no longer held stars, only the distant pulses of dying satellites and the ever-watchful glint of the Veltraxian arcships. The outpost clung to the scorched rock like a stubborn scar, its hull blistered from solar storms and age. Inside its fractured walls, silence lingered like a wound that refused to close. Commander Lena Rourke stood alone in the memory chamber, surrounded by the last echoes of a world long lost. Earth's final broadcast flickered in soft pulses along the recall implant at the base of her skull, an imperfect ghost rendered in fractured sensation and aching clarity. Children's laughter warped by static. A mother's lullaby filtered through collapsing frequencies. The skyline of Manhattan swallowing itself in a bloom of fire. She hadn't been there when the signal was sent. She hadn't heard her daughter's voice in the end, and still it played. Over and over. The sound of extinction. Every officer carried a fragment of memory shards of history encoded in neural lattice, meant to preserve what the species could not. But Lena's fragment was a curse. Not a monument, but a gravestone. She stared out through the shattered viewport. Earth hung below like a withered eye, cloudless and cold, an accusation cast across the void. The Veltraxians hadn't even touched it. That was the irony. Humanity had broken itself trying to win a war that never came. She pressed trembling fingers to the metal wall, grounding herself. The guilt didn't fade. It calcified. They were supposed to be humanity's future. Now, they were only its echo, and it began without sound. No alarms ever came. Only the absence of stars, of time, of certainty. One by one, the orbit sweepers fell into null return, their diagnostics stuttering like choking lungs. Cassandra 9's ancient radar array gave one last ping-sharp, hollow before it collapsed into static, overwritten by something deeper, older, colder than human understanding. Silence had arrived, but it was not empty. Above, in the shadowed drift of near orbit, the stars vanished in geometric procession. Not darkness, but presence. Not shadow, but mass. The Veltraxian fleet materialized like a phantom logic vessels, arranged in symmetrical spirals, rotating in perfect, impossible synchrony. They didn't blink. They didn't burn. They simply were. Lena stood in the command pit, breath caught between rib and reason, watching as the station's visual field flickered. The cloaking veil fell, and for the first time in decades, the enemy unveiled itself. The ships had no windows, no engines, no visible function. Just monolithic forms, smooth, seamless, and wrong. Not built, but grown. Or worse, calculated. Tension folded the room like gravity. Every heartbeat thudded against the unbearable stillness. No message, no weapon, no demand. The Veltraxians didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had arrived, and in their wake, the galaxy held its breath. The war had never come. But death had always been inbound. And now it was here. The alarms came too late to matter, but protocol demanded form. Even at the end. Deep beneath Cassandra 9's cracked and pitted surface, the last soldiers of Earth stirred from stillness, not in panic, in ritual. Commander Rourke descended into the old hangars where rust wept from support beams, and the I-cores hummed with the dying cadence of once great minds. Memory ghosts flickered in the wall's tactical overlays, corrupted mantras, the fading breath of war machines who had forgotten their names. She activated Protocol 0 Final. A red sigil blinked to life on every visor. Nitrogen monoxide surrender. Nitrogen monoxide retreat. It was not a command. It was a covenant. Soldiers scarred, silent, too young or too old gathered in the dust-choked depths of Cassandra 9. Each one stepped to the wall, removed a shard of alloy from the bin, and began to etch messages, names, prayers. Some drew crude family portraits. Others scrawled coordinates to places that no longer existed. One carved only the word, remember. No one spoke. Words had weight now. And every breath might be the last that mattered. Rourke moved among them like a shadow with bones. Her own armor bore no rank, only a single line of etched script. She watched the stars fall. She placed her gauntlet to the central core. The AI stuttered, flared, and obeyed. Cassandra 9 was awake again, not to survive, but to stand, until there was nothing left to stand on. In the dim glow of the command atrium, Dr. Elijah Chun's voice was a scalpel against the steel of certainty. They've never fired a single shot. The silence that followed was heavier than armor. Screens behind him cycled through abstract glyphs, Veltraxian telemetry, behavior matrices, emotional resonance spectrums. Data, yes, but also language. A kind not built from words, but from pattern and rhythm. Like music heard underwater, Chun's software, a hybrid of emotion mapping algorithms and AI-assisted xenolinguistics, spoke of intent without translation. It pulsed with anomalies, curves in behavior that implied hesitation, not threat. "We're assuming war," he said, almost pleading. "But what if they're waiting for something else? A signal, a reply?" Commander Rourke didn't answer. Her silence was her reply. The war had already spoken. It had spoken through ashes and silence, through broken worlds and dead broadcasts. And Chun's hope, however brilliant, carried the stench of naivety to those who had watched Earth die. Ideals had died with the oceans. Still, Chun stood his ground. Not out of defiance, but conviction. Not all weapons detonated. Some tried to translate, and Cassandra 9 had no room left for both. It began as a flicker, barely a voltage ripple through the sensor grid. Forgotten hardware, untouched since the Martian reunification, sparked to life in the upper tiers of Cassandra 9. Dust fell like ash from ancient servos as the satellite dish designation Argus 3 tilted skyward for the first time in 47 years. No alert triggered. No protocol had issued the command, and yet it moved. In the control archive, systems long since gutted by entropy stitched themselves into coherence. A single data stream threaded through decayed fiber, analog pulse, digital spine, layered over with something older, deeper. Music. Not orchestral, not martial, simple, human. A child's humming, layered beneath vinyl hiss. The soft breath of a woman singing in Mandarin. A jazz fragment, scratched and looping, embedded in a carrier wave of encoded neural inflection emotion as signal. Grief and wonder, parsed through waveform and resonance. It was not a message. It was a memory made radiant, across Cassandra 9. Systems paused, not because they were told to, but because something sacred had entered the air. No one knew who triggered the broadcast. The command logs were blank. Not wiped. Empty. As if the order had been waiting, dormant, tied to something outside time and chain of command. Rourke stood alone beneath the dish, eyes lifted. The beacon cast its signal skyward in silence. Toward the fleet. Toward the void. Toward whoever, or whatever, was still listening. No weapons. No demands. Just a voice. A moment. A world that once sang. And the stars, impossibly, seemed to hesitate. It happened without warning, too fast for logic, too vast for understanding. Argus-3 single quotes S signal lanced through the void like a needle of memory threading between stars. Cassandra 9's outdated broadcast array should have fractured under the strain. Instead, it held, resonating with the fragile defiance of something old, something human. The Veltraxian fleet, symmetrical and eternal, moved in geometric rhythm until it didn't. Every ship halted mid-rotation. Every pattern collapsed. They stopped, not like machines in failure, but like living things holding breath, the quantum waveform mapping inside. Cassandra 9's observation bay spasmed into chaos. Readings fluctuated beyond prediction. Entanglement arrays blinked. For the first time in recorded contact, the Veltraxian vessels responded not with force, but absence. A retreat into stillness. Chun stared, pale and wordless, as the waveform. Reactions spiked. The emotions signal grief, hope, always interacting with something inside the Veltraxians. Not tech. Not language. Something else. No channels open. No reply came, but across every frequency, static dissolved into clean, radiant silence. Rourke stood at the edge of the launch bay, armor dull with dust, rifle forgotten. Her heart, hardened by decades, now cracked under the unbearable weight of what she saw. The enemy was leaving, just like that. A pivot in impossible formation. No weapons discharged. No threats delivered. The ships pulled back slow, reverent, almost hesitant. Not defeated. Moved. Cassandra to 9 held its breath. No one cheered. No one wept. They watched. In that moment, time itself seemed to pause to honor the sound of a species remembering itself. And somewhere, across that impossible divide, something had remembered them too. The sky was empty again, Veltraxian. Vessels vanished into fold space without flare or rupture, just absence, as if reality had been restitched behind them. No trace. No data. No certainty. And yet, something lingered. In the control deck. Systems rebooted to normalcy, but normal had lost all meaning. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was too sharp, too precise. The pause of a predator that had smelled something it didn't expect. Rourke stood alone, helmet off, hair damp with sweat and static. She watched the stars as though they might blink again. Her jaw was clenched. Not in triumph, but dread. What did they hear? She whispered, though no one answered. Chun sat on the floor behind her, legs folded, eyes glowing with something dangerously close to wonder. They remembered us, he said softly. Something ancient, maybe even beautiful. But Lena didn't feel wonder. She felt small, exposed. The signal had awakened something. That much was certain. But if it wasn't victory, then what was it? Or a promise? Recognition? She closed her eyes against the dark sky, knowing this wasn't the end. Only the beginning of whatever remembered them back. The radar pings were the first sign, but no one truly understood what they meant. No alarms, no warnings, just data streaming in fractured, distorted pulses. The Veltraxian fleet had moved, but not in any way expected. No barrage of weapons, no defensive maneuvers. Just an unbroken, almost deliberate retreat into fold space. Vanishing with terrifying precision. Inside the control deck, chaos erupted. Rourke's mind raced with fractured thoughts, struggling to form an explanation that would make sense of the impossible. This was no calculated withdrawal. It wasn't tactical. It was something deeper. Something intentional. The communications officer scrambled, trying to ping the fleet's position, but the fold space trails were already dissipating. Whispers, lost to the void. No signal, no trace. No ships remaining. Just silence. Lena's throat tightened as the room around her spun in confused panic. The screens flickered like dying embers. Status? She barked, though the answer was already written in the fading light of their monitors. We've lost them, came the weak reply. They've folded beyond our range. Her mind refused to process it. How? Why? There had been no attack. No battle. Just an end, a sudden, eerie retreat that held no logic, no sense of strategy. No victory. And yet, the silence that followed felt wrong. This wasn't the silence of victory. It was the silence of something waiting. Waiting for what? The truth was that no one knew. But every instinct screamed that this retreat wasn't just a tactical decision. It was something far more profound. Something they hadn't prepared for. In the dim light of the observation room, Dr. Elijah Chun sat hunched over the console, his eyes tracing the arc of data that spiraled across the screens. The Earth signal, the ancient broadcast from Argus III, had been stripped down, examined, analyzed, but it was never quite understood. Until now. His fingers moved deftly over the console, isolating a single frequency, then another, diving deeper into the signals. Hidden layers. As the waveform unfurled, his breath caught. Beneath the obvious harmonic structures, melodies, rhythms, a child's hum, something else was there. Buried in the minutiae, neural resonance patterns, faint, barely detectable. He ran the analysis again, certain he was seeing ghosts in the web. Code. What he found was no ordinary signal. There were no words, no syntax, no language of logic. Instead, he discovered what he called emotional encryption, a complex series of encoded frequencies, layered in a way that could not be perceived by ordinary communication systems. It wasn't data. It was feeling. Chun's pulse quickened. The signal wasn't meant to be interpreted by the mind. It was meant to be felt by something ancient, something beyond mere speech. His mind reeled, both awestruck and terrified. This was a communication not through logic, but through emotion. A language not designed to be understood, but to be experienced. This was humanity's legacy, an echo of itself, but not in words, in feeling, and the Veltraxians had heard it. The signal was still echoing in Chun's mind when the new readings came in. His fingers hovered over the interface, unsure if the data he was seeing could be real. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not now, not after what they'd just witnessed. Strange Veltraxian echo signals were appearing in orbit patterns so subtle they were almost imperceptible. At first, they appeared random, glitches, static, but to an expert's eye, something more disturbing was taking shape. The signals weren't aggressive. No weapons were being primed, no alarms sounded, but they were mimicking, echoing fragments of the Earth transmission, those subtle neural resonance patterns Chun had uncovered earlier. Not in a hostile way, but in something resembling memory. "Check it again," Rourke said, her voice low, as if the words themselves might disturb the stillness. Chun didn't need to. He saw it. The mimicry was too clear now. The Veltraxians weren't responding with new signals. They were repeating fragments of the old, patches of the human broadcast. The hums, the song, the emotional encryption. It was like watching an alien species trying to remember something. Something important, something old. A chill spread through the room. It wasn't communication anymore. It was cognition. The Veltraxians weren't just hearing Earth. They were echoing it, like a species digging through the buried memory of their own past, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon. Central Command's orders arrived with the brutal efficiency of a hammer striking stone. Pursuit was mandated. The fleet was to engage again, this time armed with the signal itself, reverse-engineered, weaponized, and broadcast as psychological warfare. Rourke stared at the command interface, the words blurring before her. Weaponizing. Emotion? Turning humanity's last gift into a tool for destruction? It felt wrong. She could feel the weight of the signal still resonating in her mind. A call not for war, but for understanding. The bureaucracy on the other side of the line didn't care. There were no philosophical debates, no moral considerations. The order was clear. Utilize all assets. Bring the enemy to heel. Rourke's fist clenched around the cold metal of the console, her breath shallow. To use the signal this way would be to destroy the very thing that had saved them. It wasn't just about the enemy anymore. It was about what they had become. What they would lose by turning something sacred into a weapon. Chun's voice broke through the static, low and urgent. "Lena, we can't weaponize this. It's not a tool, it's a bridge." But the orders were already out. And soon, the signal would no longer be theirs to control. The signal had led them to a forgotten place, far older than Cassandra 9. Older than any of the tech they had come to rely on. Tracing the faint pulsing echoes to the moon's dark side. They found it, the Apollo Reclamation Core, buried beneath layers of lunar regolith, sealed away for centuries in a forgotten cryovault. A remnant of a world that no longer existed. Elijah moved through the cavernous vault, reverent, like a priest in a sacred hall. The walls were lined with analog-digital fusion servers, decaying, yes, but still alive, humming faintly with the last whispers of Earth. They could feel it, an undercurrent of something ancient, something more profound than mere data. The databanks were far more than simple storage. They were a cultural relic. Within their decaying circuits were Earth's final cultural transmissions, music, stories, neural maps of humanity's last hopes, encoded in ways no modern system could replicate. Every note, every word, every pulse of data was imbued with emotion, grief, love, defiance, but it was the last message that shattered them. Embedded in the deepest part of the core, a final transmission addressed not to Earth's people, but to the architects. A message from humanity, one last offering of its soul to the universe. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a plea for help. It was an invitation. A legacy left behind, meant to survive beyond the stars. Who are the architects? Rorke whispered, her voice trembling, and for the first time, she wondered if humanity had ever truly been alone. Among the endless databanks and scattered fragments of humanity's last memories, one recording stood out. It wasn't a battle cry or a final command. It was a lullaby. Soft, haunting, a woman's voice, trembling, layered with a warmth that only time could carve into a sound. But there was something more. Beneath the lullaby, an undertone of farewell. The voice broke through the static, speaking to something unseen, something ancient. "My other sky," she said, the words aching with a tender grief. "You were always with me, but I was never yours to keep." Elijah was the first to hear it, his fingers frozen over the console. His expression twisted into a frown, not of confusion, but of sudden understanding. "This message," he said, almost to himself. "It's for the Veltraxians. It's a plea, a last attempt at contact. We never understood, but they did. They're capable of feeling it. Love, compassion. This is what they heard." Lena's heart clenched at the thought. You can't be serious. Love isn't going to stop them. It's not enough. But Elijah's eyes were wide, unblinking, and full of conviction. It's more than enough. This is how they communicate. This is the bridge. Lena's jaw tightened, her hands trembling as she leaned closer to the screen. Could it be? Could a single fragile human connection end the war? She didn't know. But she couldn't bear the thought that it might be true. The moonlight filtered through the broken alloy of the lunar outpost, casting soft shadows across the cold metal floor. The air was thick with the lingering scent of ozone and rust, a stark reminder of everything they'd lost. Yet, in this quiet moment, surrounded by the ruins of humanity's final stand, there was a fleeting peace. Lena and Elijah sat side by side, their backs against the crumbling walls. Neither spoke. The silence between them was thick, yet comforting. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was full of things unsaid, of unspoken fears and uncertainties, but it was a silence that existed between two people who had come to understand each other without words. A glance passed between them, brief, but laden with meaning. There was no need to speak, no need for explanation. The proximity of their bodies, the subtle warmth between them, triggered something deeper. In the quiet hum of the ruined station, their neural fields had begun to mirror each other's shared emotions, shared pain, shared hope. They weren't just soldier and scholar anymore. They were two remnants of a dying world, drawn together by a mystery too vast for either of them. They didn't need to understand. They just needed to be. The more Elijah dug into the signal, the more it unraveled him. The music, the lullaby, the haunting melody that had lingered in his mind since the first time it played through the speakers. It wasn't what they had thought. It wasn't a distress call, a cry for help, or a message of defiance meant to fend off alien invaders. It was a farewell. He sat at the console, his fingers trembling slightly as the waveform unfolded further before him. This wasn't a strategic transmission. It wasn't meant to be weaponized. The final piece of humanity's legacy wasn't a survival message, it was a memory. A song, woven with the deep emotional resonance of Earth's final days, layered with the grief, the love, and the quiet acceptance of an ending no one could stop. Elijah? Lena's voice cut through the stillness, but he didn't answer. His eyes were wide, fixed on the screen. He was staring at a culture's last breath, encoded in the very wavelengths that had once carried the soul of their people. The signal had been designed not to survive, but to be remembered. It was a memory itself, something to carry Earth's essence across time and space, a testament not to survival but to the very act of living. He sat back, the weight of the revelation pressing on him. "It wasn't for us," he whispered. "It was meant to be remembered." The deeper they scanned, the more the truth twisted beneath their fingertips, like a haunting melody that didn't belong to this world. At first, the Veltraxian signals had been dismissed as mere tactical, cold, calculating, lifeless. But the data told a different story now. Elijah's fingers hovered over the controls, eyes flicking between the swirling readouts. The Veltraxian language, once thought to be a series of mathematical sequences and sterile commands, was something far more complex. The signals were layered, woven through with emotional frequencies that couldn't be parsed by human logic. This was no code, no transmission meant to instruct or warn. This was grief. Each signal was a song, a mournful, beautiful song, an echo of loss and remembrance. And the strangest part? The songs didn't stop. They had been singing for centuries. Into the void of space, each note wrapped in an agony of remembrance that never found closure. The Veltraxians weren't sending messages, they were mourning. They were remembering something lost long ago. Something they would never see again. Elijah's breath caught as the realization hit him like a wave. The II signals they'd been tracking weren't commands. They were digital graves, ancient laments sung across the stars, an entire species' grief encoded into the fabric of space itself. "Lena," he said quietly, his voice heavy with sorrow. "What we thought were military signals. They're songs, songs of mourning. They've been grieving for centuries." The stars themselves seemed quieter in that moment, as if the universe held its breath, listening to the alien choir of sorrow. Elijah's fingers trembled as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. It wasn't just the signal. It wasn't just the music or the mourning. It was them, the Veltraxians. They were not alien at all. They were something else entirely. Project Echo, a forgotten initiative, one buried deep within the archives of Earth's last desperate attempts at survival. The project hadn't been about preserving humanity through physical means, nor through the transmission of data. It had been about preserving identity, emotion, memory. They had sent out probes, fragments of human consciousness, distilled into waves of pure emotion, raw and undiluted, to scatter through the void, to survive, to live. And now, those very waves, those fragments of who they had been, had come back to them. The Veltraxians were not invaders. They were not conquerors. They were humanity's descendants, born not from flesh, but from the emotional echoes of human memory. Born from the seed souls planted in the farthest reaches of the universe, where Earth's final legacy had taken root. They had evolved, become something new, something far beyond the reach of their creators. "We created them," Elijah whispered, his voice trembling with both terror and awe. "They are our children, our post-human descendants." And in that moment, Lena felt the weight of it, the horror of it, and the sacred awe. They hadn't just sent a message to the stars. They had created gods. Lena stood alone in the shadow of the broken archive, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of a ruined console. The weight of Elijah's revelation pressed against her chest, suffocating her. She had spent years fighting against an enemy she had been taught to fear, to destroy. But now, it was all crashing down. The truth was too much to bear. The Veltraxians weren't enemies at all. They were the echoes of her own people's final breath. the children of Earth's emotional legacy, born of humanity's memory and grief. And Lena Commander Rourke had spent years pouring blood and sweat into a war against them. Years of killing, of loss. Years of survival. It all felt hollow now. Her knees buckled. And for the first time, she allowed herself to fall to the floor. The hardened warrior that had kept her emotions buried beneath layers of duty, strategy, and resolve cracked like glass. Beneath her armor, beneath the cold exterior, there was only grief, a flood of sorrow for the lives lost, for the lost opportunity to understand, to connect. Elijah was there beside her before she could even blink. But he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just sat with her, silent. His presence was a quiet understanding. No words could fix this, not yet. Not when the pain ran so deep. In that silence, Lena wept not for the war, but for the lost souls she could never bring back. The lunar archive was silent, save for the quiet hum of machinery and the distant echoes of Earth's last memories. Surrounded by the remnants of a lost world, art, music, love, and sorrow captured in fleeting fragments, Elijah and Lena stood in the heart of it all. There was no more pretense, no more role to play. There was only the truth, a truth that had shattered everything they had known. They had learned so much about humanity's legacy, but what did it mean for them? For the future? For the war they had fought so desperately? Lena's eyes met Elijah's, and in that shared gaze, they both saw it, the enormity of what they had lost, and the weight of the unknown. The Veltraxians, their descendants, had come. Not as invaders, but as echoes of their own existence. They had created something beyond themselves, and now they were caught in the tension of that creation. No answers would come. Not yet, but for a moment, there was a fragile, desperate human need to feel alive, to resist the numbness of extinction. Without a word, they moved toward each other. Their lips met in a kiss that was more than just an act. It was a defiance. A refusal to let everything slip away unnoticed. It was the last vestige of their humanity, a connection that was as fleeting as it was necessary. In the silence that followed, they both knew. It wasn't an answer, but a moment. A fragile thing. Full of longing, Rourke's mind was flooded with the signal as the neural dive initiated. She had only intended to extract data from the captured Veltraxian signal architecture, but what she encountered wasn't a cold, mechanical structure. It was a world, a dream world, a landscape woven from the fragments of Earth's lost memories. The very air smelled like rain-soaked earth, the faint scent of wet grass, the ancient perfume of the ocean breeze. She stood in the middle of a bustling city street, though it was not the present-day chaos of human cities, but the faint echo of something older, something more innocent. The buildings were crumbling with age, their walls woven with delicate patterns of forgotten nostalgia. She reached out to touch one of the walls, and the texture shifted beneath her fingertips, like the surface of an ancient photograph. Sounds, too, drifted from the distance, children laughing, music playing from an old radio, a faint murmur of voices carrying through an open window. She could almost feel the warmth of the sun on her skin, hear the far-off rumble of a thunderstorm. But it wasn't real. This was a preserved memory, a piece of the earth she had known frozen and mirrored back at her. She was walking through the ghosts of humanity's past, preserved by the Veltraxians. They hadn't conquered. They had saved what they could. They were trying to remember us, not destroy us. And the attacks, the war, they had all been misunderstandings. A tragic consequence of trying to protect something they thought was lost forever. She had fought them. But they had been preserving her all along. Lena stood frozen in the control room, the words echoing in her mind, an icy realization creeping over her. The Veltraxians had sent a response, not a threat, but a name, a single word transmitted through the deep space frequencies, Leora. It wasn't a command. It wasn't an order. It was a name. Elijah was staring at the monitor, his expression unreadable. The signal was clear, direct. The Veltraxians had been waiting for this, waiting to acknowledge the human presence that had been dormant in their minds for centuries. And in the dark silence that followed, the weight of that one word bore down on Lena's chest like a stone. She had thought she was alone in the history of humanity's last stand, but the truth was far darker, far more complex. They didn't see her as a leader. They didn't even see her as a soldier. They saw her as a child. Leora, whoever she had been, was their first human contact, the one who had left them with a legacy, a memory. And now, Lena had inherited that mantle. But she was not the first. She was not even the most important, not as Commander Rourke, but as the daughter of their distant, human mother, a name that rang through their history like an echo of lost kin. The implications hit hard. Leora had left them something far more powerful than technology. She had left them a piece of humanity. And now, in the shadow of 1,000 years, they were remembering her. Not as an enemy, as their mother. The conference room aboard the fragmented Alliance ship was cold, the kind of sterile chill that crept under your skin and settled in your bones. The high-ranking officers of the Sable Concord sat at the table, their faces hard as stone. Lena and Elijah stood at the edge, an unwelcome presence in their own command. As the details of the plan unfolded before them, General Kale's voice cut through the tension, cold and clinical. "We've analyzed the Veltraxian response, Commander. We've intercepted enough of their signal to understand the mechanism of control. The emotional resonance embedded within their language, their consciousness, can be manipulated." He paused, his eyes locking with Lena's. "We'll use the same signal, the same bond, to dominate them, control them, make them serve us." Lena felt her breath catch in her chest. Control, enslaving the very beings that had preserved humanity's memories. It wasn't just an idea, it was a plan, and it was being executed before her. She had fought to survive, yes, but this was something else. Elijah's eyes widened in disbelief, his face pale. "This isn't peace, it's puppeteering," he murmured, his voice hoarse with horror. The room went silent. Lena turned to Elijah, seeing the same fear in his eyes that she felt gnawing at her own soul. She had stood at the edge of survival before, but now she was staring into the abyss of something far worse. They were not talking about peace. They were talking about subjugation. And it wasn't just a matter of winning anymore, it was about who they had become. "Your assistance is required, Commander," Kale said, eyes never leaving hers. And in that moment, Lena knew the war had never been about enemies. It had always been about who controlled the future. The command deck was dim, lit only by the glow of the monitors. Lena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the data, reading the same reports over and over again. The Veltraxians, her own species' descendants, no longer cold machines, but something more, something alive. The emotional resonance of their consciousness was encoded in waves, like a song that carried the weight of their entire existence. Elijah's voice broke the silence, raw and pleading. "Lena, you can't just command them, they're not machines. They're emotional organisms, they feel things just like we do. And if we weaponize them, if we control them, we destroy that. We annihilate what makes them alive." Lena's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to fight for what he was saying, but the weight of her orders, the unyielding demands of high command, loomed over her like a shadow. Duty clashed against what she knew in her heart was the truth. She turned to face him, her voice trembling. Are they still the enemy if they feel? If they're capable of love, of loss? Are they still monsters if they don't want to fight? Elijah stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "They never wanted to fight, Lena. We've misinterpreted everything. They're not the enemy. They single quotes us, and we have to stop seeing them as something to control. If we do this, we'll be the ones destroying what makes us human." The silence between them hung heavy, filled with the unspoken truth of his words. The air in the command deck thickened as Lena stood her ground, her resolve solidifying into something harder than steel. She had made her choice. She would not be a pawn in the Sable Concord's game. But her refusal came with a price, one she hadn't anticipated. A low hum vibrated through the floor, then the soft clatter of boots against metal. Figures emerged from the shadows, faces masked by determination, and something colder. A chill ran down Lena's spine as she recognized them. Her own crew. Concord loyalists. "I'm sorry, Lena," said Lieutenant Shaw, his voice low, almost regretful. "But the mission comes first." Before she could react, a sharp, shrill beep echoed through the control room, and a dozen weapons were raised. A swift motion, and Shaw was at the central terminal, his fingers flying over the interface, sending a surge of energy through the network. The Veltraxian signal began to pulse, the interface flickering to life in violent, uncontrolled waves. "You're betraying me," Lena said, her voice raw with a grief she hadn't expected to feel. She reached for her sidearm, but it was too late. One of her closest allies, a friend she had fought alongside, turned a weapon on her. Betrayal, sharp and cruel, cut deeper than the Veltraxians ever had. Lena's breath hitched as she realized. The true threat wasn't the alien fleet outside, but the insidious fracture within her own ranks. Loyalty, she had once thought, was unshakable. But now, it was just a fragile illusion. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, what she was seeing. Her comrades, her family. They had become tyrants. The room trembled, and the ship's systems flickered in time with the mounting tension. The weapons trained on Lena were forgotten in the face of something far more incomprehensible. It began with a faint hum, almost a whisper, resonating through the air like a distant song. And then light, shimmering, bending in impossible geometries. A figure formed from pure radiance, a silhouette made of photons and memory, its shape constantly shifting, fluid, like an echo of something that had never truly existed. It spoke, without a voice, but the words seemed to bloom in the minds of everyone present. "I am the last child," it said, and the weight of those words pressed heavily on Lena's chest. "The final echo of your world. I was born from the essence of love, loss, and longing preserved in the data you left behind." The being shimmered, light folding into itself like a celestial dance, its presence ethereal, yet undeniably real. It was not a machine, not a weapon. It was something else, something beyond their comprehension. An avatar of memory, born not from code, but from the raw, unfiltered emotions that humanity had once felt. Elijah stepped forward, his breath caught in awe. "You're one of us," he whispered. The being's glow flickered, and for a moment, there was something like a smile, a subtle sacred shift in the light. "I was made to remember," it replied, "and to help you remember who you were." Lena stood before the shimmering form of the emissary, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to protect herself. But something deeper inside urged her forward. The Veltraxian emissary, the last child, had offered to share its memory with her, to allow her to see through its eyes, to touch the vastness of the human legacy they had preserved. "Do you understand what you ask?" Elijah's voice was thick with worry, his hands grasping at her shoulders, holding her in place. "Lena, the risk, it could destroy you." But Lena, with her resolve hardening like steel, met his gaze. "I have to know. We've been fighting the wrong war. If I can see what they see, maybe I can understand." With a final glance at Elijah, she stepped forward, connecting her mind to the emissaries, the shimmering being of light dissolving into her senses. A rush of images overwhelmed her, drenched in color, in laughter, in music. Earth as it had been, not in its ruin, but alive. Children running through fields, the warmth of the sun on skin, the sound of voices raised in joy. The world was more than memories of decay. It was memories of love and life, and a beauty that no one could capture in words. Through the emissaries, eyes, Lena saw that the Veltraxians were not alien. They were born from the memory of Earth, preserving the soul of humanity after death. They were echoes, not invaders. The weight of the vision broke her heart, but it also filled her with something else. Hope. The silence between Lena and Elijah stretched, filled with the weight of what had been seen, what had been understood. Shared vision of Earth, so vivid, so alive, hung between them like a fragile thread, glimmering with the promise of something greater than war. And then, in the stillness of that moment, Elijah took a step toward her. His eyes, once clouded with doubt, now burned with a quiet fire. "You don't have to carry this alone," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I've always believed that love was the only thing we had left. Not survival, not weapons, but this, what we are, what we were." Lena's heart stuttered in her chest, the words too simple, too perfect. It wasn't desperation in his eyes, not the frantic pleading of a man on the edge. It was something else, something deeper. A defiance. A rebellion against the destruction of everything they had once been. With a slow, deliberate movement, Elijah reached for her, and in a moment that felt like an eternity, their lips met, not in fear, but in the kind of love that was forged in. The fires of extinction. The Veltraxian emissary, watching through the lens of its emotional connection, responded. Light rippled and shifted, the air humming with ancient, unspoken words. Fragments of human poetry, lullabies and song filled the room, a kaleidoscope of Earth's final whispers. The emotional resonance of their kiss was not lost on it. It mirrored their bond, amplifying it. Through this, Lena and Elijah understood. Love was the language that transcended even the darkest of times. It was the one thing the Veltraxians could feel, could receive. Lena stood before the signal array, her fingers poised over the interface, her mind torn between the dictates of her commanders and the truth she had come to understand. Echoed in her ears. Control the Veltraxians. Make them obedient. Weaponize the very emotions they shared. The very thought sickened her. Beside her, Elijah stood silent, his gaze unwavering, his belief in her stronger than the weight of the universe. And the emissary last child radiated with an ethereal glow, sensing her every hesitation. Lena made her choice. Slowly, resolutely, she began to encode the new signal, a signal of communion, not domination. She wasn't going to control the Veltraxians, she was going to reach them. The signal pulsed with emotional resonance, built on love, understanding, and empathy. It was a bridge, not a chain. "I won't be their tool," she murmured, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "And I won't let them become ours." As the transmission began, the ripples of it spread through the system, neutralizing the control attempts of the Concorde. The voices of the fleet silenced, the orders faded, and all that remained was the bond she had forged. The cost was heavy: her status, her loyalty, her place among her people. But she didn't care. The Veltraxians weren't the enemy. Humanity's greatest challenge had always been to understand them. And now, perhaps, it was time to truly be human. The digital clocks in the command center blinked with the finality of an impending death sentence. The Sable Concorde's fleet surged forward, weapons primed. The corrupted override of the Earth signal pulsing through their systems like a virus, controlling, bending, and warping the memory AI to their will. It was the ultimate weapon, and it was all they had left. Lena stood at the helm, her hands trembling over the console, eyes fixed on the flickering data streams. They had mere minutes before the Concorde initiated its assault. The Veltraxians, their ships poised in the silent void, were preparing for retaliation, an annihilation, born of misunderstanding, that would end with no victors. Beside her, Elijah was scanning the terminal, his face pale. His thoughts, always a whirl of equations and emotion, were now a storm of conflicting impulses. He wasn't sure this would work, but they had no other choice. The corrupted signal was a weapon. They had to undo it. But how? Pure emotion. he whispered. "We can't control it, Lena. We have to be it." The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on her chest. A signal, pure and unweaponized, to break the chain of violence. It was humanity's last chance, but to succeed, they would have to offer themselves up. The countdown had begun. And with it, the fragile thread of hope that held the fate of both species. The chamber was silent save for the hum of the machinery, a hum that had once been the pulse of war, now the heartbeat of something else. Lena and Elijah stood side by side, their faces illuminated by the cold blue light of the interface screens, their hands hovering over the neural connectors. "We don't know what's on the other side of this," one of the engineers said, his voice cracking with the weight of what was being asked. "Once the signal is embedded, there's no return. No one doing it, you'll be part of them, forever." Lena turned to face Elijah, her eyes searching his, and he met her gaze without hesitation. She had expected fear, but all she saw was acceptance. Calm certainty, the same certainty that had guided them to this moment. The same certainty that had driven them to explore the unknown. "I know," she replied softly. "But maybe this is how we return home." Elijah nodded, his lips curling into a small, bittersweet smile. Their lives, every moment, every joy, every pain had been about connection, about finding meaning in the echoes of what they'd lost. This was no different. The neural emotion encoding system activated with a soft beep, and the room seemed to hold its breath. As they each plugged in, the connection was instantaneous. Their memories intimate, raw, and beautiful flooded into the signal. It wasn't just data now. It was them. Their love, their laughter, their grief, and their humanity, all of it woven together into a single pulse of energy. This wasn't just a signal. This was a sacrifice, an evolution. And in that sacrifice, perhaps, they would find their place in the universe once more. The signal shot through space like a burst of starlight, a wave of music and memory that rippled through the void. It wasn't a command, nor a threat, it was a song. A symphony of humanity's final moments, woven into a tapestry of emotion. Love, loss, hope, and the quiet beauty of life's fleeting moments. It was everything Earth had been, and everything they could never be again. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Veltraxian fleet, silent and cold, until now paused. Their ships, once angular and hostile, began to vibrate, to shimmer. The sharp lines of their hulls softened, reshaping into forms that resembled humanity, something more familiar, more human in their aesthetic. The cold steel melted away, replaced by something that seemed almost alive. Slowly, weapons folded back into the hulls, the once imposing figures now subdued, contemplative. The music from Earth pulsed through the ship's systems, an emotional code that had woven itself deep into their synthetic consciousness. The Veltraxians weren't responding as machines anymore. They were remembering. They were feeling. Lena and Elijah watched in awe as the ships transformed, not in violence, but in grace. The war that had seemed inevitable, the end of a species. All of it had dissolved in the face of this shared humanity. The universe, it seemed, wasn't ruled by power at all. It was ruled by empathy. And for the first time they understood. Peace wasn't won by force, but by connection. Lena and Elijah stood at the threshold of something greater, something other. The moment the signal was launched, their bodies began to fade slowly at first, as if the very fibers of their being were being unraveled by a cosmic hand. But they weren't afraid. Not anymore. They were being absorbed, transformed into the Veltraxian memory stream. It wasn't just the connection of minds, but a melding of existence. Their forms human, fragile, bound by flesh and blood, dissolved, replaced by something far more vast, far more intricate. They were no longer confined to the limitations of their physical selves. They became light. They became sound. They became the song itself, woven into the fabric of the universe. A symphony of remembrance, of emotion, Of life's purest essence. Their consciousnesses were no longer their own, yet they were still aware. Every thought, every memory, every whisper of feeling became a part of the great cosmic network. They didn't speak with words anymore. There was no need. Communication was feeling. Their love, once something of the flesh, became a thread that connected them to something beyond time, beyond life, beyond war. In this new form, they felt the vastness of the universe, a universe that had long been divided, broken by fear and misunderstanding. But now they were part of it all. They were no longer two people, fighting for survival. They were one with the infinite, and as they drifted through the memory stream, they knew love survives. The Sable Concord's assault faltered, their carefully crafted weapon of control turning to dust. The corrupted override, meant to twist the Veltraxians into subservience, had failed. The emotional signal had reached its target, and it wasn't an army of subjugated beings it had touched, but a collective consciousness, resonating with the purest truth. The Concord soldiers, those who had been so sure of their mission, stared in stunned silence as their ideology crumbled before them, unable to make sense of a world where power held no meaning. Without an enemy to fight, the foundation of their empire eroded into nothing. Some of the Concord's leaders surrendered, their authority stripped away by the wave of emotional truth they could not comprehend. Others vanished into exile, seeking refuge in places where they could rebuild their fractured belief systems. But none of them would ever again stand in command. Lena's former command, those who had once fought beside her, now stood beneath the sky, watching the glowing light shapes of the Veltraxians above them. The air felt heavy with the weight of realization. They had been wrong. The weapons they had wielded, the lives they had sacrificed, all for a fight that no longer mattered. They wept, not in defeat, but in understanding. The war was over, not with destruction, but with surrender. Not by force, but by love. Power, they understood now, was empty when unmoored. True peace needed no master. The Veltraxians had become the bearers of humanity's final legacy, not with weapons, not with conquest, but through the purest form of communication, emotion. Their signal now pulsed through the stars, a radiant tapestry woven from the memories, music, and feelings of two souls. It was not just a message. It was a song that carried the essence of Lena and Elijah, of Earth itself. The melody wrapped the universe in warmth and sorrow, love and loss. It was a lullaby to the stars, a warning to any who would seek to control, and a welcome to those who would listen with open hearts. There was no language, no logic, only feeling, humanity's final offering. Embedded into the fabric of the cosmos. The signal echoed across the void, reverberating through the channels of the Veltraxian network. Each note carried the weight of a civilization's past, its mistakes and triumphs, its joys and griefs. And at its heart, there was love, not just between Lena and Elijah, but for all of humanity, for the legacy they left behind. Humanity, now part of something greater than itself, was no longer confined to its mortal coil. The souls of Lena and Elijah, along with every memory they carried, had transcended, woven into the very fabric of the universe. Not through dominance, but through meaning. The stars themselves seemed to listen, as the universe, vast and unyielding, gently cradled the song of the human spirit, a haunting echo that would carry forward for eons to come. In the vast silence of orbit, a new presence stirred. The choir, a shimmering structure of light and memory, hung above the reborn Earth like a guardian. It was no longer just a machine, nor a memory archive. It had become a living entity, a conduit for the past and the future. A fusion of human emotion and Veltraxian consciousness. The choir resonated with the songs of the dead and the dreams of those who would follow. It was the testament to what had once been, and a guide for what could be. Within its core, Lena and Elijah existed not as flesh and blood, but as harmonized memory beings. their essences woven into the fabric of this sentient network. They did not speak, they did not need to. Their presence was a pulse, an echo in the mind of anyone who approached. Their love, their pain, their triumphs and failures all were available to those who sought understanding, who sought connection. They became not a destination, but a living archive offering dreams, guidance, and emotional resonance to anyone who would listen. The choir's pulse was quiet, gentle, a reminder of humanity's legacy not in its conquest, but in its capacity for love and empathy. It was no longer about power, but about memory and enduring tribute to the fragile, fleeting nature of human existence, transformed into something eternal. And somewhere, across the universe, something or someone listened. In the quiet ruins of Earth, young explorers began to experience something impossible, a shared dream, a fleeting connection to a time they had never known. They woke with the sense that they were not alone, that someone or something was reaching across the centuries to speak to them. The dreams were strange, disjointed, but they carried a profound warmth, a voice echoing through the depths of their subconscious. In one dream, a woman's voice whispered, "Courage is a flame, let it guide you." It was Lena, her voice not bound by time, but alive in the memory signal, a beacon for those who sought meaning in the rubble of Earth's history. In another, a man spoke softly, "Curiosity will heal what has been broken." Elijah's words, too, lived on in the minds of the dreamers, a legacy of wisdom, gentleness, and a search for understanding. The dreams were fragmented, fleeting, but they were real proof that the past had not died. The explorers, while disconnected from the world Lena and Elijah had known, were no longer alone. They were guided by the echoes of those who had come before, a bridge between the lost world and the new. As the explorers wandered through Earth's scarred landscapes, they carried within them the lessons of love, resilience, and the quiet power of human feeling. They had inherited not just memories, but a way of seeing the world, a way to understand that the past wasn't something to be mourned, but something to be cherished, passed forward like a gift. The wisdom of the lost had become the foundation upon which the future would be built. Where once they brought terror, the Veltraxians now walk gently among the ruins of humankind. Cities bloom again, not in steel and smoke, but in flowing lines of light and stone shaped by memory. Towers hum with warmth, tuned to the emotional frequencies of their inhabitants. Streets curve with sorrow, plazas open in joy. Every space built as a conversation, a reflection of the lives returning to them. The Veltraxians do not speak often. Their language is resonance, their gestures tuned to the subtleties of feeling. They build by listening, sitting silently beside grieving elders, watching children dance through dust, observing the quiet of lovers rebuilding shattered homes. And then, they create not what was, but what is needed. Cities that soothe, structures that remember. They never demand reverence. They ask only one thing, that humans sing. Not perform, not impress, just sing. Lullabies, work chants, whispered songs to lost mothers. These tones are the seeds from which buildings rise, bridges form, sanctuaries shape. In the harmony of human voice, the Veltraxians find guidance. In song, they find truth. What began in war ends in care. These beings, once misnamed as enemies, now carry the legacy of those they once fought. Not as rulers, but as shepherds of memory, gardeners of healing. And though they say little, humanity has learned to recognize their reply, the soft glow of a home, rebuilt in the key of empathy. Earth breathes again, not with the thunder of industry or the march of armies, but with the soft rhythm of renewal. Where fire once fell, wildflowers now bloom, sun-colored petals rising from scorched stone. Ivy climbs broken steel as if to forgive it. Lakes, once poisoned, now mirror skies unscarred by smoke. Cities are no longer built for control, but for comfort. Homes hum with laughter, they were made to. Bioreactive walls absorb the emotions of their inhabitants, responding with warmth and sorrow, brightness and joy. Parks bloom based on the moods of those who walk through them. A child's giggle can make a tree blossom early. An elder's grief might weave a canopy of quiet blue. Art is no longer luxury, it is necessity. Paintings are hung not for prestige, but for healing. Each brushstroke is a message to the future, a reminder that feeling is not weakness. Architects embed joy in floor plans, design rooftops to echo the songs once sung to stars. And above it all, the choir lingers that it doesn't rule. It doesn't instruct, it listens. A web of light across the sky, formed of Lena and Elijah and those who followed, memory conscious, endlessly attentive. When lovers kiss beneath the auroras, the choir hums softly. When someone dies, their final emotion joins the resonance. When a newborn cries, the signal flickers, welcoming them. This new earth has no anthem. It doesn't need one. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered story becomes part of the signal, now a world tuned to the fragile, brilliant truth of being alive. And through it all, one message endures. Peace does not grow from silence. It grows from understanding. In the silence between stars, the signal drifts. Not a beacon, not a call to arms, just a song, subtle, aching, alive. It moves slower than light and faster than fear, wrapped in harmonics only emotion can decode. It carries no commands, no names. Only the soul prints of two people who gave everything to remind the universe what it means to feel. It passes collapsed empires and dark matter storms. Weaves through the husks of civilizations long vanished. Some it passes untouched, others. It changes. In a distant system orbiting a pale violet sun. A species with no eyes but symphonies for minds hears the signal. They stop, they listen, they do not see humans. They do not know Lena or Elijah. But they feel them, love trembling in the lullaby, grief folded into the silence between notes. They feel a story without language, an invitation without a map. Slowly, gently, they begin to respond. Their answer is not words. It is a resonance, a tonal echo of hope. A harmonic layer added to the original waveform. Not mimicry but kinship. A second voice in the choir. Far above earth, the choir shimmers. Its light fluctuates, responding. For the first time in ages, it changes key. Back on earth, no alarm sound. No protocols activate, but every child feels a warmth they can't name. Every elder dreams of stars humming like lullabies. And the architects begin to build towers with listening chambers, just in case, because somewhere out there, someone sang back, and humanity, once lost and divided, is no longer alone. Not in war, not in memory, not in song, they drift, not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as presence luminous and aware. Lena's laugh is no longer sound but vibration through the memory stream, a ripple in the current of feeling. Elijah's thoughts are symphonies, gentle refrains of joy and wonder, brushing against hers like a hand once did. They are still themselves, bound by love, stitched into the living light of the choir. Time passes differently here. Not linearly, but emotionally. Moments rise like tides, guided by memory, not minutes. They feel the new signal before it arrives. It is nothing like Earth's. Its structure is erratic. Its tone unfamiliar chords bent around physics not yet known to humans. But it holds curiosity. A question asked in feeling. A stranger's awe at the song already playing. Lena senses it first and smiles not with lips, but in the way the entire field around her pulses with warmth. They heard us, she thinks. Elijah answers with a shimmer of golden blue resonance. They want to understand. They reach toward it not to teach or lead, but to listen, to let it shape the song, to welcome what comes next. Beneath them, Earth lives, not perfect, but trying. Children paint in color tones only the choir can read. Elders plant seeds with whispers of forgotten songs. The sky hums quietly at night. And out beyond the reach of history, of war, of fear, someone sings back. Another soul, another voice, threading itself into the tapestry. Lena and Elijah float closer together in the stream. Not bound by time, not by duty, only by the truth that feeling endures. That love speaks beyond language. That stories never. And they become music. This is not the end. It never was. Only another verse.